I watched in horror as my father brought a sledgehammer down on my 16-year-old son's birthday gift. The metallic crunch of Ethan's first car being destroyed echoed through our driveway while neighbors gathered to witness the chaos. My dad's face was twisted with rage, screaming about teaching respect and family values. But what he didn't know was that my mother-in-law had been recording everything from her bedroom window upstairs. And what she captured would expose a decades-long family secret that would change everything we thought we knew about loyalty manipulation and the true meaning of family. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this absolutely wild family drama, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If this story already has you hooked, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because trust me, you won't believe where this family revenge story goes. Buckle up, because Grandma's about to serve some ice-cold justice that'll make your jaw drop. My name is Serafina, and I thought I knew my family. I thought I understood the dynamics that had shaped my life for 38 years. Boy, was I wrong. The morning of Ethan's 16th birthday started like any other Saturday. I had spent weeks planning the perfect surprise. A restored 1987 Honda Civic that I had secretly been working on with my husband Marcus in our garage. It wasn't flashy, but it was safe, reliable. And most importantly, it represented freedom for my son, who had been walking to school and his part-time job for months. Marcus and I had scraped together every spare dollar for 6 months to make this happen. We skipped date nights, ate ramen for dinner more times than I care to admit, and I even picked up extra shifts at the hospital where I work as a nurse. But seeing Ethan's face light up when we presented him with those keys made every sacrifice worth it. The problems started when my father Robert arrived for the birthday celebration. He had always been controlling, but something seemed different that day. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaky, and he kept muttering about kids these days and not appreciating hard work. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked as he stumbled slightly, getting out of his truck. "I'm fine," he snapped, but the smell of alcohol on his breath at 10 in the morning told a different story. My mother-in-law Eleanor had been staying with us for the past month while recovering from hip surgery. She was upstairs resting when Dad arrived, but I noticed her bedroom curtains move slightly as she watched from her window. Eleanor had never gotten along with my father. There was always this underlying tension that I never fully understood. The birthday lunch went smoothly enough. Ethan was over the moon about his car, already making plans for weekend trips with friends, and talking about the responsibility of car ownership. Marcus beamed with pride as our son thanked us repeatedly. Even my mother Patricia seemed happy, though she kept shooting nervous glances at my father. That's when everything went sideways. My father suddenly stood up from the dining table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous," he announced, his voice slurring slightly. 16 years old and getting handed everything on a silver platter. You're raising a spoiled brat, Serafina. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I asked, confusion mixing with growing alarm. "Ethan works hard. He's had a job for 8 months, he maintains a 3.8 GPA, and he's been saving for his own car insurance." "That's not the point." Dad's voice escalated, and I saw Ethan flinch. "When I was his age, I had to earn everything. I worked in factories, I fought for every opportunity. This generation expects everything to be handed to them." Marcus tried to intervene. "Robert, maybe we should talk about this privately. Don't tell me how to handle family matters," Dad snarled, pointing an unsteady finger at my husband. "This is about family values, something you clearly don't understand." The comment stung because Marcus had been nothing but respectful to my parents for the 15 years we had been married. He worked 2 jobs to support our family and had been the one to suggest we surprise Ethan with the car. What happened next felt surreal, like watching a movie where everything moves in slow motion. My father stormed outside and we all followed, thinking he was leaving. Instead, he went to his truck and pulled out a sledgehammer. "Dad, what are you doing?" I screamed as he approached Ethan's car. "Teaching a lesson about earning respect," he growled, raising the hammer above his head. The first blow shattered the windshield. The second dented the hood. By the third strike, neighbors were coming out of their houses, some with their phones already recording. I was frozen, watching 16 years of my son's trust in family relationships being destroyed, along with the car we had sacrificed so much to buy. Ethan was crying. Not just sad tears, but the heartbroken sobs of a child whose world has just been turned upside down. Marcus was shouting at my father to stop threatening to call the police. My mother stood paralyzed, tears streaming down her face. But through it all, I noticed Eleanor's bedroom window. The curtain was pushed aside completely now, and she was clearly visible, her phone pointed downward at the chaos below. Something about her expression wasn't just shock or dismay. It was calculating, almost satisfied in a way that made no sense given the circumstances. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes, my father dropped the sledgehammer. The car was totaled. Windows smashed, body panels dented beyond repair, headlights destroyed. $8,000 and 6 months of planning reduced to scrap metal in our driveway. Maybe next time he'll appreciate hard work, Dad said, breathing heavily as he walked back to his truck. Get out, I whispered, then louder. Get out. Don't ever come back to my house. As his truck disappeared down the street, I held my sobbing son while Marcus called our insurance company. The neighbors gradually dispersed, some offering help, others clearly uncomfortable with the family drama they had witnessed. That's when Eleanor appeared at the front door. She had somehow made it downstairs despite her recent surgery and limited mobility. Her face was grim, but there was something else there, a determination I had never seen before. Serafina, she called softly. I need to show you something. Something about your father that I think you need to know. She held up her phone and I could see she had been recording. But it wasn't just the car destruction. The timestamp showed she had been filming for much longer. How long have you been recording? I asked. Since your father arrived, she replied. And I caught something that changes everything. Something that explains why he's been so desperate to control this family and why he's been lying to all of you for years. As I looked at Eleanor's determined expression and thought about my father's increasingly erratic behavior over the past months, I realized this birthday disaster might not be the ending of our family's story. It might just be the beginning of finally learning the truth. Eleanor's words hung in the air like a challenge to everything I thought I knew about my family. As we helped her back upstairs to her room, my mind raced with questions. What could my father possibly be hiding that would explain his violent outburst? And why had Eleanor been so prepared to record everything? Mom, what do you mean about Dad lying? I asked once we were settled in her bedroom. Marcus had stayed downstairs with Ethan, helping him process what had just happened and starting the insurance claim process. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she navigated through her phone. I've suspected something for months, sweetheart. Your father's behavior, the way he's been making financial demands on your mother, his sudden interest in your family's assets. It all started adding up to something that didn't make sense. She pulled up a video file and handed me the phone. This isn't just from today. I've been documenting things for weeks. Watch from the beginning. The first clip was from 3 weeks ago. I could see my father in our backyard, but he wasn't alone. He was on the phone, pacing back and forth near our garden shed. Eleanor had managed to position herself by her window where she could hear pieces of the conversation. No, I told you I need more time, my father was saying into his phone. The family doesn't suspect anything yet, but if you keep pushing, they're going to start asking questions. There was a pause while he listened to whoever was on the other end. Listen, I've been skimming from the business account for months. Patricia doesn't know, and neither do the kids. But $30,000 isn't enough to cover what I owe you people. My blood went cold. Skimming from what business account my parents had always claimed they lived modestly on Dad's retirement pension and Mom's small Social Security check. The video continued with more fragments. The house is worth about $400,000. Yes, I know I can't sell it without Patricia's signature. That's why I need the kids to help convince her. Eleanor, I whispered. How long have you known about this? I started suspecting something when your father began pressuring you and Marcus about moving in with them to help with expenses. She replied. A man who supposedly has financial struggles doesn't usually offer to take in a family of 3 unless there's another angle. Then I noticed he kept asking questions about your house value, your savings, Marcus's job security. She scrolled to another video from last week. This one showed my father going through our mail when he thought nobody was watching. He had specifically targeted what looked like financial statements and bills. He's been gathering information about your family's assets, Serafina. I think he's planning something much bigger than just moving in together. The pieces were starting to form a terrifying picture. My father's increasing aggression, his sudden interest in our finances, his anger about Ethan's car. It wasn't about family values or teaching lessons. It was about control and access to money he desperately needed. There's more, Eleanor said, pulling up today's recording. Watch what happened right before he destroyed the car. This video showed my father on another phone call by his truck, thinking we were all still inside with birthday cake. His voice was desperate, almost panicked. I know what I owe you, but threatening my family isn't going to make the money appear faster, he was saying. Give me 2 more weeks. I'm working on getting access to more funds. Yes, I understand what happens if I don't pay. You've made that very clear. He hung up the phone and immediately opened his truck to retrieve the sledgehammer. The car destruction wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. It was calculated. It was meant to devastate our family financially and emotionally, making us more vulnerable and dependent. He knew destroying Ethan's car would hurt us financially and emotionally. I realized aloud. He was trying to weaken us, make us more likely to need his help with expenses. Exactly, Eleanor confirmed. And I think the people he owes money to aren't the kind who accept late payments gracefully. Your father is in serious trouble, and he's been planning to drag your entire family down with him. I thought about all the times over the past few months when Dad had suggested we move in together, how he had emphasized the benefits of pooling resources and helping each other out. He had even offered to help us refinance our house, claiming he had connections who could get us better rates. We need to tell Marcus, I said, standing up, and we need to warn Mom. If Dad's been hiding this from her, she could be in danger too. Eleanor grabbed my arm gently. Sweetheart, there's something else. Something about your mother that you need to understand. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I don't think your mother is as innocent in this as we've been assuming. Watch this video from yesterday. She showed me a recording of my mother and father having a heated conversation in our kitchen while Marcus and I were at work and Ethan was at school. They thought Eleanor was napping. Robert, you promised me this would be over by now, my mother was saying. I can't keep pretending to be supportive of their financial decisions when I know what you're planning. Patricia, we've been over this. Once we get access to their accounts and convince them to sell this house, we can pay off our debts and start fresh somewhere else. It's not like we're stealing from strangers. They're family. But destroying that car seems extreme. Ethan is just a child. Ethan is a spoiled kid who doesn't appreciate sacrifice. Besides, the insurance money will help them see they need our financial guidance. The conversation continued with my mother expressing concerns, but ultimately agreeing to continue the deception. She knew about the plan. She had been part of it from the beginning. I sat down heavily on Eleanor's bed, feeling like the foundation of my reality was crumbling. Both of my parents had been systematically planning to manipulate and financially exploit my family. The people who had raised me, who I had trusted and loved unconditionally, were essentially running a long-term con game on their own daughter. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, Eleanor said softly. I know how much this must hurt, but you needed to know the truth before they could do any more damage. What do we do now? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the betrayal. Eleanor's expression hardened with determination. Now we turn the tables. They want to play games with family loyalty and financial manipulation. Well, 2 can play that game, and I've had a lot more years to perfect my strategy. As I looked at my mother-in-law, I realized that today's disaster might actually be the beginning of something much more significant. Eleanor wasn't just offering comfort. She was offering to help us fight back. And something told me that my parents had seriously underestimated who they were messing with. The next few hours transformed our house into a war room. Marcus's initial shock at learning about my parents' betrayal quickly morphed into strategic fury. As we sat around our kitchen table with Eleanor spreading out printed screenshots of the recorded conversations and mapping out what we knew, I watched my husband's protective instincts take over. "So, let me get this straight," Marcus said, his voice controlled but dangerous. "Your father has been gathering intelligence on our financial situation for months, planning to manipulate us into a position where we'd be forced to give them access to our assets, all to pay off debts to what sounds like loan sharks." "That's exactly what it looks like," Eleanor confirmed. "And your mother-in-law has been his willing accomplice, playing the concerned parent while setting up her own daughter for financial ruin." Ethan had been unusually quiet since we explained the situation to him. At 16, he was old enough to understand the implications, but still young enough for this level of family betrayal to shake his fundamental beliefs about trust and love. "So Grandpa didn't destroy my car because he was mad about me being spoiled," Ethan said slowly. "He did it because he wanted to hurt our family financially and make us desperate enough to trust him with our money." "That's right, honey," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm so sorry you had to learn about this kind of deception from people who should have protected you." "Actually," Ethan said, his voice growing stronger, "I'm not just hurt anymore. I'm angry. Really angry. And I want to help you make them pay for this." Eleanor smiled approvingly. "Now that's the spirit we're going to need. Because what I'm proposing isn't just about protecting yourselves. It's about making sure they can't do this to anyone else." She pulled out a notebook where she had been organizing her observations and evidence. "I've been thinking about this since I first suspected something was wrong. Your father's desperation suggests he owes money to dangerous people, but his confidence in manipulating your family suggests he's done this before. I think we need to dig deeper into their financial history." Marcus leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we investigate whether your parents have been running this same con on other family members or friends. People who trust them, people who might have been convinced to make bad financial decisions based on their advice." The idea sent chills down my spine. I thought about my Aunt Sarah, who had mentioned last year that my parents had helped her navigate some financial difficulties. And my cousin Mike, who had borrowed money from my parents for a business venture that never seemed to materialize. "You think they've been doing this to other people in our family?" I asked. "I think your father's gambling or drug debts or whatever's put him in debt to these dangerous people didn't happen overnight," Eleanor said. "And I think desperate people often repeat patterns that have worked for them before." Marcus was already pulling out his laptop. "I can start making some calls. Sarah's husband works at the bank where your parents have their accounts. If there have been unusual transactions or financial irregularities, he might be able to point us in the right direction." "Wait," I said, a new worry occurring to me. "If Dad really owes money to dangerous people and we start exposing his schemes, won't that put us all at risk?" Eleanor's expression grew even more determined. "Sweetheart, you're already at risk. The fact that he was willing to destroy Ethan's car shows how desperate he's become. Desperate people make increasingly dangerous choices. The question isn't whether to fight back, it's whether to fight back smart or wait around to become victims." She was right. I thought about the conversation we had overheard about Dad's creditors threatening the family. We were already in danger. We just hadn't realized it yet. "Okay," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "What's the plan?" Eleanor opened her notebook to a page filled with detailed notes. "First, we document everything. I've been recording, but we need to be more systematic. We set up cameras around the house, we record every interaction, and we start building a comprehensive case. Second, we investigate their other victims. Marcus, you reach out to family members who have had financial dealings with Serafina's parents. Find out who else might have been manipulated. Third, we turn the tables. Instead of just defending ourselves, we go on the offense. We make them think their plan is working while we gather evidence of their crimes. Marcus looked up from his laptop. You want us to pretend to fall for their manipulation? Exactly. Let them think they're successfully breaking down your resistance. Let them get comfortable and sloppy. People who think they're winning often reveal more than they should. Ethan raised his hand like he was in school. What about the people Dad owes money to? If we expose him, won't they come after us for the money? That's where Phase 4 comes in, Eleanor said with a smile that was frankly a little scary. We make sure that when your father's house of cards collapses, he's the only one left holding the debt. Over the next 2 hours, we developed a detailed strategy. Marcus would reach out to family members under the guise of checking in on everyone's financial well-being after a recent news story about elder financial abuse. Eleanor would continue her surveillance, but with better equipment and more systematic documentation. Ethan would help by keeping track of any interactions between his grandparents and recording any conversations he overheard. And I would be the bait. You want me to call my parents and tell them that today's incident has made us realize we need their financial guidance? I asked, making sure I understood the plan correctly. Exactly. Tell them that seeing how quickly financial security can disappear has opened your eyes to the importance of family support. Ask for their help in restructuring your finances and planning for the future. Won't they be suspicious that I'm reaching out so quickly after Dad destroyed Ethan's car? Eleanor shook her head. People who are running cons often overestimate their own manipulation skills. They'll convince themselves that the car incident was actually effective in breaking down your resistance. Their desperation will make them want to believe you're ready to cooperate. As we finalized the details, Marcus made his first call to my Uncle David, my mother's brother. What we learned in that 10-minute conversation changed everything we thought we knew about the scope of my parents' deception. David says your parents convinced him and Janet to refinance their house 2 years ago, using a mortgage broker your father recommended. Marcus reported after hanging up. They ended up with a higher interest rate and worse terms than they started with, but the broker paid your father a significant finder's fee. They've been doing this for years, I realized. They've been systematically manipulating family members into bad financial decisions so they can profit from the referral fees and commissions. Eleanor nodded grimly. And now they're escalating to direct theft because the smaller schemes aren't generating enough money to keep up with whatever debts they've accumulated. As the sun began to set on what had started as my son's 16th birthday celebration, I looked around the table at my real family, Marcus, Ethan, and Eleanor, and felt a fierce determination growing in my chest. My parents had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that family loyalty and love would make us easy victims. They had no idea that family loyalty also makes for very motivated adversaries. And they definitely hadn't counted on Eleanor, who seemed to have a talent for strategic thinking that made me wonder about her own past. All right, I said, picking up my phone to call my mother. Let's show them what happens when you mess with the wrong family. But as I dialed the number, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover something much bigger and more dangerous than we had imagined. The phone call to my mother went exactly as Eleanor had predicted. When I told her that the car incident had opened our eyes to how fragile financial security could be, I could practically hear her relief through the phone. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you're finally seeing the bigger picture. Mom said, her voice dripping with false concern. Your father may have been harsh, but sometimes tough love is what it takes to make people understand reality. I think you're right, Mom. Marcus and I have been talking, and we realize we need guidance from people with more experience. Would you and Dad be willing to help us restructure our finances? Of course, honey. Family takes care of family. Why don't you come over tomorrow evening? Your father has some contacts who specialize in helping young families maximize their financial potential. As I hung up, Eleanor gave me an approving nod. Perfect. Now we wait for them to reveal their hand. What we discovered over the next 3 days exceeded our worst expectations. Marcus's investigation into other family members revealed a pattern of financial manipulation spanning at least 5 years. My parents hadn't just been running small-time referral scams. They had been operating a sophisticated network of financial fraud, targeting their own relatives. Uncle David and Aunt Janet weren't the only victims. My cousin Lisa had been convinced to invest in a fake real estate development that my father had promoted. My grandmother's neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, had been talked into a reverse mortgage that left her with almost no equity in her home. Even my father's own brother had lost his small business after taking financial advice that turned out to be deliberately destructive. It's like they've been systematically destroying the financial stability of everyone who trusts them, Marcus said as we reviewed the evidence. The question is why? Even adding up all the referral fees and commissions, we're talking about maybe $50,000 over 5 years. That's not enough to justify this level of systematic betrayal. Eleanor had been unusually quiet during our investigation, but when Marcus made that observation, she looked up with a grim expression. Unless the money wasn't going into their pockets, what if they were being forced to generate these funds for someone else? You mean like they're not the masterminds, but they're working for someone who has something on them? I asked. Exactly. And if that's the case, then your father's desperation makes more sense. He's not just trying to pay off gambling debts or drug dealers. He's trying to satisfy someone who has enough leverage to force him into betraying his entire family. That evening, Marcus and I went to my parents' house for our supposed financial consultation. Eleanor had equipped us with hidden recording devices and a plan to get my father to reveal details about his situation. What we discovered was worse than anything we had imagined. The financial advisor my father had brought in was actually a man named Vincent Caruso, who turned out to be involved in an identity theft and mortgage fraud ring. The plan they presented wasn't just about getting access to our assets. It was about using our identities and credit histories to secure fraudulent loans worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The beauty of this approach, Caruso explained as if he were presenting a legitimate investment opportunity, is that we can leverage your excellent credit scores and clean financial history to secure development loans for properties that don't actually exist. By the time the banks realize what's happened, the money will be safely offshore, and you'll be able to claim you were victims of identity theft. But what about the legal consequences? Marcus asked, playing his role perfectly. My father jumped in with practiced smoothness. That's the beauty of working with family. We all protect each other. If anyone gets questioned, we all tell the same story about being victims of sophisticated criminals who stole our identities. As they laid out the details of their scheme, I realized that my parents weren't just planning to steal our money. They were planning to destroy our entire financial lives and potentially send us to prison for crimes we didn't commit. The level of betrayal was breathtaking. But what really shocked me was when my mother pulled out a folder containing detailed financial information about not just our family, but about Eleanor as well. We've also been looking into Marcus's mother's situation, Mom said casually. She has some valuable assets that could be useful for our purposes. Her house is paid off. She has a substantial savings account, and her medical expenses have been creating some interesting tax deduction opportunities. They were planning to victimize Eleanor too. The woman who had risked her own safety to expose their crimes was already in their crosshairs. That's when I knew we had moved beyond family drama into something that required law enforcement intervention. These weren't just greedy relatives making bad choices. These were career criminals who had been using family relationships as cover for a sophisticated fraud operation. This all sounds very promising, I said, forcing myself to maintain the facade. When would we need to start the process? We're hoping to have everything in place within 2 weeks, Caruso replied. The sooner we move, the better. Some of my other associates are getting impatient about seeing returns on their investments. As we left my parents' house that night, I felt sick to my stomach. The people who had raised me, who had taught me about right and wrong, were planning to frame their own daughter and son-in-law for federal crimes. But Eleanor was waiting for us with news that would change everything. I've been doing some research on Vincent Caruso while you were gone, she announced as we walked through the door. It turns out he's been under FBI investigation for 18 months. And more importantly, they've been looking for someone with inside access to his operation. What are you saying? Marcus asked. Eleanor smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had just played a winning hand. I'm saying that while you were being recruited as victims, I was on the phone with Special Agent Rodriguez of the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. It turns out they've been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity to get close to Caruso's operation. You contacted the FBI? I asked, stunned. I contacted them 3 days ago as soon as we realized the scope of what your parents were involved in. Agent Rodriguez has been very interested in our evidence, especially the recordings of Caruso explaining his fraud schemes. As Eleanor explained the FBI's interest in our case, I realized that our family revenge plot had accidentally become a federal law enforcement operation. My parents thought they were finally closing in on their biggest score, but they were actually walking into a trap that had been 3 days in the making. So what happens now? I asked. Eleanor's smile was absolutely predatory. Now we give them exactly what they want. We agree to participate in their fraud scheme, we provide them with the access they need to move forward, and we document every single step of their criminal conspiracy. And then, Marcus asked, and then we watch them get arrested by federal agents while they're in the middle of committing wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges that will put them away for the next 10 to 20 years. The next 10 days felt like living in a crime thriller. Special Agent Rodriguez turned out to be a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had spent the last decade building cases against financial fraud rings. She was particularly interested in our evidence because Caruso's operation had been elusive, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement by using trusted family relationships to avoid suspicion. Your parents' involvement actually makes perfect sense from an investigative standpoint, Agent Rodriguez explained during our covert meeting at a coffee shop downtown. Family-based fraud is one of the most difficult types of crime to prosecute because victims are often reluctant to testify against relatives, and juries sometimes struggle with the emotional complexity of family betrayal cases. But in this case, Eleanor noted, you have victims who are eager to see justice served and who have extensive documentation of the criminal conspiracy. Exactly. Plus, Mr. Caruso has gotten comfortable using family networks because he assumes they provide protection from law enforcement. He's not expecting his victims to be actively cooperating with federal investigators. The plan Agent Rodriguez developed was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus and I would continue playing our roles as eager participants in the fraud scheme, but instead of providing real financial information, we would be feeding the criminals carefully constructed false data that would allow the FBI to trace their money laundering operations while protecting our actual assets. Eleanor's role was particularly crucial because her recording equipment and surveillance position made her the perfect inside observer. The FBI provided her with professional-grade recording devices and trained her on evidence collection procedures that would ensure everything we captured would be admissible in court. The key, Agent Rodriguez emphasized, is to let them believe they're in control right up until the moment we arrest them. People like Caruso and your parents are most likely to reveal the full scope of their operations when they think they're about to complete a successful crime. What we learned over those 10 days was staggering. The fraud ring wasn't just operating in our city. They had victims in 6 states and had stolen an estimated $2.3 million over the past 3 years. My parents weren't small-time criminals who had gotten in over their heads. They were experienced operators in a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The recordings Eleanor captured revealed that my father had been recruited into the operation 4 years earlier when he had gotten caught embezzling money from the charity where he volunteered. Instead of being reported to police, Caruso had offered him a choice: go to prison or work off his debt by recruiting new victims from his family and social networks. The beautiful thing about family-based recruitment, we heard Caruso explain to my father during one recorded conversation, is that people trust their relatives implicitly. They don't do the kind of due diligence they do with strangers, And even when they start to suspect something's wrong, family loyalty keeps them quiet long enough for us to finish the job. What made it even worse was hearing my mother's responses during these planning sessions. She wasn't a reluctant participant being coerced by my father. She was an enthusiastic partner who often suggested ways to make their schemes more effective. "Serafina has always been too trusting," I heard my mother say during one recording. "If we present this right, she'll probably try to talk other family members into participating too. She's always been the type to want to share good opportunities with people she cares about." Listening to my own mother strategize about how to exploit my personality traits to commit crimes against our family was devastating. But it also crystallized my determination to see this through to the end. The final phase of the operation was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. Caruso had arranged for us to meet at a downtown office building where we would sign the fraudulent loan documents and provide the identity information needed to complete the crimes. What my parents didn't know was that the office building was under FBI surveillance, and that every person in that meeting besides themselves would be either an FBI agent or a cooperating witness. On Thursday evening, Agent Rodriguez called to confirm that all the surveillance equipment was in place and that the arrest teams were ready to move. "Tomorrow, your parents and their associates will be charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and elder abuse. The evidence you've helped us collect is strong enough to secure convictions that will put them away for 15 to 20 years. "What about the other victims in our family?" I asked. "Will they get their money back?" "Some of it. We've been able to freeze several accounts and seize some assets, but unfortunately, a lot of the money has already been spent or moved overseas. The victims will recover some of their losses, but probably not everything." That night, as our family prepared for what would be the final confrontation with my parents, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and sadness. Tomorrow would bring justice, but it would also mark the definitive end of any relationship with the people who had given me life. Eleanor seemed to sense my emotional conflict. "You know, sweetheart," she said as we sat in the kitchen going over the final details. "Family isn't just about blood relationships. Sometimes the people who truly care about you are the ones who show up when you need protection, not the ones who happen to share your DNA." Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem surreal. Marcus took the day off work. Ethan stayed home from school, and we all tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy while knowing that by evening my parents would be in federal custody. At 2 o'clock, my mother called to confirm our appointment. "We're so excited about this opportunity, honey," she said, her voice warm with false affection. "Your father and I have been talking about how proud we are that you're finally taking control of your financial future." "We're excited too, Mom," I replied, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. "We'll see you at 3. As I hung up the phone, Agent Rodriguez sent a text confirming that all surveillance teams were in position. In less than 2 hours, my parents would walk into that office building thinking they were about to complete the biggest fraud of their criminal careers. Instead, they would be walking into the end of their freedom and the beginning of justice for all the family members they had betrayed and victimized. The only question remaining was whether they would maintain their lies right up until the handcuffs clicked shut, or whether the reality of their situation would finally force them to confront the enormity of what they had done to the people who loved them. The arrests went exactly as Agent Rodriguez had predicted. My parents and Vincent Caruso walked into that office building at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, confident they were about to complete a major fraud. By 3:15, they were in handcuffs, and by 4 o'clock, they were being processed into federal custody. I wasn't present for the actual arrests. Agent Rodriguez had strongly recommended that we stay away to avoid any suggestion that we had entrapped our own family members. But she called us immediately afterward with a detailed report. "Your father tried to claim he was being coerced," she told us. "He insisted that Caruso had threatened his family and forced him to participate. But when we played back some of the recordings your mother-in-law had captured, including his enthusiastic planning sessions and his suggestions for recruiting additional victims, that defense fell apart pretty quickly." T. What about my mother? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Your mother maintained her innocence for about 20 minutes. Then we showed her the video of her discussing how to exploit your personality traits to recruit other family members into the scheme. After that, she became very quiet and requested a lawyer. The legal proceedings moved quickly after that. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of lengthy federal sentences, both my parents agreed to plea bargains in exchange for cooperation in the broader investigation of Caruso's fraud ring. My father received 12 years in federal prison, and my mother received 8 years. The sentencing hearing was the last time I saw them. They both looked smaller, somehow diminished by the weight of their choices and the reality of their consequences. My father avoided eye contact entirely, but my mother kept staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Part regret, part defiance, part desperate hope that I might somehow forgive the unforgivable. I didn't speak to either of them that day. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said through their actions and choices. The aftermath brought unexpected healing along with expected pain. The other family members who had been victimized by my parents' schemes formed a tight-knit support network. Uncle David and Aunt Janet, cousin Lisa, even elderly Mrs. Peterson. We all found comfort in sharing our experiences and helping each other rebuild. Marcus's cousin, who works in financial planning, volunteered to help all the victims create new financial strategies and rebuild their credit. A local church offered counseling services for those struggling with the emotional impact of family betrayal. Most surprisingly, several of the victims decided to start a support group for people who had experienced financial abuse from family members, and it grew into a nonprofit organization that now helps dozens of families each year. The insurance settlement for Ethan's destroyed car provided enough money to buy him an even better vehicle. But more importantly, the experience had taught him lessons about trust, family, and integrity that no classroom could provide. You know what's weird? He told me 6 months after the arrests. I'm not even angry about the car anymore. I mean, I was devastated at the time, but now I realize that losing a car is nothing compared to learning that the people who raised you never actually cared about your well-being. How do you feel about that? I asked, concerned about the long-term emotional impact on him. Honestly, I feel grateful. Grateful that I learned early that family isn't automatic, that love isn't guaranteed, and that the people who really care about you will prove it through their actions, not their words. Eleanor became the cornerstone of our rebuilt family structure. Her courage in exposing my parents' crimes and her strategic thinking throughout the investigation had shown us what real family loyalty looked like. When her hip fully healed, instead of returning to her own apartment, she chose to stay with us permanently. You know, she said one evening, as we sat on our back porch watching Ethan practice driving his new car. I've lived for 73 years, and I've learned that the families we choose are often stronger than the families we're born into. What do you mean? I asked. I mean that your parents chose greed and criminality over their children and grandchildren. But we chose each other. We chose to fight for each other, protect each other, and build something better together. That's not blood relation. That's conscious love. A year after the arrests, we received word that the FBI had successfully dismantled Caruso's entire fraud ring using evidence gathered during our case. 17 people were arrested across 6 states, and investigators estimated that our cooperation had prevented additional frauds worth over $800,000. Agent Rodriguez sent us a letter thanking us for our exceptional courage and cooperation in bringing dangerous criminals to justice. But more meaningfully, we received letters from other victims whose lives had been saved because we had chosen to fight back instead of becoming victims ourselves. Today, 3 years later, our family has grown in ways I never expected. Marcus and I have been able to pay off our house early using money we saved by learning better financial management skills during our recovery process. Ethan is now in college on a partial scholarship studying criminal justice with a focus on white-collar crime prevention. Eleanor has become the grandmother that Ethan never really had, and the mother-in-law who shows me daily what unconditional family support actually looks like. We still talk about that terrible birthday when my father destroyed Ethan's car. But we don't talk about it as a tragedy anymore. We talk about it as the day our real family was born, the day we learned to distinguish between people who claim to love you and people who actually protect you. Sometimes people ask me if I miss my parents or if I ever consider visiting them in prison. The honest answer is that I miss the parents I thought I had, but those people never actually existed. The real Robert and Patricia were criminals who saw their own children as opportunities for exploitation. I can't miss people who were fundamentally different from who I believe them to be. What I can do is appreciate the lesson they inadvertently taught me about the difference between family by birth and family by choice. They showed me that love without integrity is manipulation, that trust without honesty is vulnerability, and that blood relation without genuine care is just shared DNA. But more importantly, Eleanor, Marcus, and Ethan have shown me that family isn't about who raises you. It's about who stands up for you when you need protection, who tells you the truth when you need honesty, and who chooses to build a life with you based on mutual respect and genuine love. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you experienced that moment when you realize that protecting yourself and your loved ones means standing up to people who should have been protecting you? Drop a comment and share your story, whether it's about family betrayal, workplace revenge, or any situation where you had to choose justice over keeping the peace. Hit that like button if this story reminded you that sometimes the families we build are stronger than the families we're born into. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in impossible situations. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that choosing your own well-being over toxic family dynamics isn't selfish, it's survival. Thank you all for listening to my family's journey from betrayal to justice. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to be someone else's victim, even when that someone is family. Here's to building lives surrounded by people who choose to protect rather than exploit, who choose honesty over manipulation, and who prove their love through their actions rather than just their words.